Welcome back to the Industrial Real Estate Show. My name is Chad, and I'm very excited to bring a bonus episode this week featuring Chris Powers, who a lot of you might know from Twitter, where he's got over 80,000 followers. He throws out a ton of great information on there. He's also got a podcast that's jam-packed with great content as well. So I feel that I've known Chris for a long time, just from following what he does. I'm a big fan of his. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for what he's done in this space. Just some quick numbers to show what he's been able to accomplish. Fort Capital has over 6 million square feet worth of Class B industrial property that they own, and they manage another 1.5 million square feet, mostly in the Texas market. And they've had a tremendous amount of success doing this. And we jump into a number of great topics about his background, why he loves Class B industrial, how they're doing deals in this interest rate environment, and what he thinks going forward on where Class B is going to be. Is it still a good time to invest? Is there still opportunity? We jump into a number of awesome topics. You'll see why I'm so excited just as you get a chance to listen to this. Hope you enjoy it. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Chad, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do it today.
I am very excited to talk to you because we've been Twitter buddies for a long time, and I love following along with your journey on Twitter, but I also know a little bit about your company, Fort Capital. I've listened to a number of your podcasts as well, so I feel like I already know you a little bit. You probably get that comment all the time as well, that people probably feel like they already know you when they're talking to you for the first time.
Yeah, no, I get that often. I think it's it's an honor that you've enjoyed and gotten value, but I think especially in today's world, building a brand online and getting to know people maybe before you quote unquote get to know them is huge. And it's been a great tool for business and for getting to know really interesting people. And like even today, now we're sitting here chatting because we got to meet online and have a lot of similar interests. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to jumping into a number of topics. I want to get your thoughts on Class B industrial. We'll kind of define it, what it actually is, some of the reasons that you're so passionate about it, and then perhaps even some advice for people that are considering either actively or passively investing in Class B. We can get to all that in a second. But I first wanted to just get to know you a little bit better, because I feel like everything that I've got to know about you online is great, but I'd like to get even a little bit deeper, if you're okay for it, on your upbringing, how you went to school. I know you got your finance and marketing major, and then how you started Fort Capital. I'd love to hear it all.
Yeah. I am a byproduct of a lot of amazing folks in my life, including my parents. So I was raised in El Paso, Texas, and grew up there. And an interesting part of my early childhood, which I think shaped a lot of who I've become today, is have two parents and my sister. And my dad, when he was 37 years old, which I'm 36 now, so this sounds even crazier the more I've told the story. He came home after being a partner at a law firm, and he told my family he wanted to quit doing that and he wanted to become a doctor. And so when I was 7 years old, my dad left being a partner at a law firm in El Paso, and we moved to Lubbock, Texas, where he started medical school at 37. And so from 37 to basically 45 years old, he was a med student and a resident. And the reason I mention that is that's really when I started getting the entrepreneurial bug, which I'll talk about. But you grow up, very comfortably middle class in El Paso, and all of a sudden, your dad's making $0 a year as a med student, and then as a resident, virtually, at the time, I think he made $30,000 a year as a resident. So that put me in a period of my life where, everything I wanted, I had to earn. I'm so grateful for that experience. And I started doing odds and end jobs, started a few businesses throughout high school. And by the time I got to college, that was kind of part of who I was. And so got into TCU, which is here in Fort Worth, Texas. And I met a guy my freshman year that had just won Entrepreneur of the Year award. His name's Adam Blake, another great person in my life, and still a great friend and a partner. He had just won Entrepreneur of the Year award for buying rental houses around TCU. So this was 2004. took him to lunch, and he basically taught me how I could buy a house as a freshman in college with virtually no money down. So we have to remember this is pre-financial crisis, and basically got a loan with very little down and cash back at closing, and bought my first rental house and learned everything I could about renting that property, and eventually was able to refinance it and actually get some real cash out. And really, for the better part of 4 years, and I loved my college experience. Like you said, I went to the Neely School of Business and majored in finance and marketing. But I really feel like I cut my teeth growing this business. And so by the end of college, had 12 rental properties, had a business that was managing other people's properties. So we had 55 doors under management. And then I had started a leasing business, leasing properties to kids at TCU that needed places to live during the year. And so by the time I graduated, which was, December of 2008, I graduated in 4.5 years. The world was falling apart. There was no jobs, and I had a full plate already. And so all of that to be said, basically my career is an extension of those early days. It's really all I've ever done. After college, and I'm happy to get into some of the things we did, but I had a few different partnerships. We started growing the business, and we were developing student housing and flipping houses and assembling land and building apartments and all these different things. Kind of a deal shop, jack of all trades, master of none around the DFW Metroplex. And then in 2014, we probably had 7-8 employees by then. I met my current partner, who's now our CEO of Fort Capital, Jason. And we quickly learned, because we were starting to try and raise bigger forms of capital, and we were trying to recruit people that had industry knowledge. And the feedback kept coming back that, let's say a big raise back then would have been $5 million raise. A lot of savvy investors, folks with lots of money or family offices, they would often say, look, you're successful, you have a good track record, but we really want to invest in a specialist, somebody that's going to wake up day after day focused on the same thing. And I probably didn't listen to that the first few meetings I had, but it kind of kept coming up over and over. And that's when I realized, okay, we have to become really good at one thing, not only so we could raise more money and grow, but we could recruit better. People that are really good at what they do, they really want to be at a company where they can see a future. They kind of know where it's headed. And, that really helped. And then on top of that, just talking to lots of, again, great people in my life, realizing that compounding knowledge and getting really good at one thing was a way to grow faster and without as much what I'd call pain and stress when you're just focused on the same thing every day. And so I say all that to say by about 2016, we had finally made that decision that that's what we were going to do. And ironically, Class B industrial was not something we had done in all those years prior. But after researching the market, we can get into why we chose, but after researching the market, listening to some wise counsel, we decided on Class B industrial, and I'm happy to go into more of why we chose that. But it was really in 2016, we became a singular focus company. It's made all the difference, and I can talk about where the company is today. But it was one of the best decisions we ever made. Class B industrial was one of the best decisions we ever made, and it's made all the difference.
What foresight that you had to make that decision before COVID came along and had this massive transformation and acceleration towards that e-commerce, and it was doing well already. Like I started in 2005, went through that great recession as well. There's a little bit of limbo for everything there, and then industrial in 2012, call it, seemed to be going on an upward trajectory, and then it just got accelerated in COVID. So when you guys had such great foresight to see that, and I'm sure it's benefited you. I was looking in your annual report from 2022, about 6 million square feet that you guys own now, and then you have another 1.5 million under management. So that's crazy growth. That's so impressive. I'm sure that's inspiring to anybody that's looking to grow and scale a portfolio to see that those numbers are possible. I do want to dig into why industrial. What was the spark that because a lot of people are familiar with residential. They'd either bought or sold houses, or maybe they did a multifamily. It's not a big stretch going from investing in 10 houses to investing in a 10 10 unit multifamily property, but it's a quantum leap going from multifamily to industrial. So what was that spark that caused this all?
Yeah, so I'll preface it by saying that we sound smarter today than maybe we were at the time. So it's a two-pronged approach. The first had nothing to do with Class B industrial. So somebody, a mentor of mine really said, knowing what you don't want in life is as important as knowing what you want in life. And so to date, we had done a lot of infill development, which is very challenging. We don't have to get into all the risks that come along with development and construction that are out of your control. He also told me, when you manage where somebody sleeps at night and is their home, it's a lot different. It's a more personal, emotional experience than it is kind of a business experience. And so at that time, we had been developing what I would argue were some of the toughest developments, taking infill land and trying to re-entitle it and rezone it and then build it, and all the neighborhood meetings. And then, once we were built, dealing with, they were great tenants, but again, it's a lot more management intensive when you're dealing with where somebody lives. And so the first thing was we were like, man, this is a really big pain. The second was when you're developing, and that was the primary part of our business at the time, it's a very lumpy business model. Cash flow and fee cash flow is clunky. You often hear of developers that get really big in boom cycles, and then when the bust happens, they end up laying off everybody because there's no development to be done, which can often happen for 2-3 year spurts before the development cycle starts again. So we didn't want to build a company like that. We wanted to build something with more recurring revenue. And then I can't remember if it was a book or something I listened to, but Sam Zell gave us a talk in like 2014 or 2015, and he was talking about, one, why they don't develop, but two, he tries to focus on assets. And I think he was talking about mobile home parks at the time, where the new supply of the product is virtually none. It's very hard to build supply, and we'll get into, Class B and why there's no real new supply coming. So there was that. And then on the macro level, this is when you were starting to hear last mile. E-commerce was starting to come up. You kept hearing, industrial buildings next to rooftops and how the world was going to optimize for faster delivery times. And not just in e-com, but all businesses were going to be forced to learn how to be more readily available. We live in an instant world now where people expect things quickly. And so as I looked at that, I said, okay, industrial makes sense. And then as we started digging within there was Class B industrial, which had a limited supply factor, but a very robust growing tenant demand. So that made a lot of sense. And then on the acquisition side, we just said, well, we want to be acquiring stuff. We don't want to be building new stuff. That way, when we bought something, really what we were solving for is like, what are we paying? So what's our basis the day we're there? And then what's our cost to lease? What's our cost to get this project to where we need to get it to? We didn't have to think about all the development factors and weather and, permits being delayed or material costs going up or things of that nature. We could very easily identify, we can buy this building. This will be our fees on that building at acquisition, and then recurring fees and recurring revenue. And it was a very simple asset to understand what our cost to lease would be, what tenants were needing, and we can get into all of that. So at the time, it was a confluence of those three factors. What we didn't want, what we didn't want as far as asset classes, the type of business we wanted to build, which was more of a recurring revenue business model, and then the macro, which was the world was telling us at that time that Class B made sense. Never did I know, it would have taken off as quickly as it had. I think I always had a feeling we'd get to where we were. It just happened quickly, and it was happening before COVID. But as you mentioned, COVID really, I think, accelerated things and really made industrial more mainstream to maybe the whole market. I think if you talk to a lot of people in industrial, they would say it was more obvious, but industrial at the time was kind of it was not near as hot as it is now. And, COVID taught us a couple things. It taught us that in a world that's totally shut down, which God forbid that ever happens again, there was really two types of real estate you needed to make the world run. You needed industrial buildings, which were essential, almost every industrial tenant was an essential business, and you needed rooftops, places to live. Retail, you didn't need to go into restaurants. You could order from them, or you could drive by and pick up. Office, we know the office story. So they were the two main essentials. And I think, as we come out of COVID, I think that's fresh on everybody's mind that these are the two maybe most resilient asset classes out there, that even through a pandemic, they only got stronger. And that's not to say there aren't other asset classes that are doing great, but those are the two that you kind of need to run the world.
Yeah, I've heard someone call it beds and sheds, and I agree with you. It's that was very evident as we went through this, and even going forward, you can see that industrial is a mainstay in the cogs of commerce. That's always going to need to be there, because virtually everything that we have, this microphone, your ear pods, everything we have has been in multiple factories along the whole supply chain. And you can deal without having an Apple store. You can deal without having wherever I bought this mic from, because you can order it directly. But those warehouses form a very important part in that supply chain. And I agree, going forward, especially compared to even multifamily right now. And I don't want to get too far off topic, but on the multifamily side, they're facing a lot of pressure right now that they haven't faced in a long time, where there's declining rents in almost every major market right now is seeing declining rents in multifamily. They've got increased expenses in the form of debt and their operating costs and property taxes. So they're almost in this situation where they've got downward pressure on their rent, upward pressure on their expenses. And I also read the other day that the most they're delivering for new developments this year, the most amount of multifamily developments in the last 40 years. So now they're also going to have increased supply. It'll be interesting to see what happens on that multifamily side. But I'm like you, I'm bullish on industrial long term. And I do want to get into defining Class B industrial, just so people have a better understanding of what it is. But I had a question that I wanted to actually circle back to. And when you were going through university and you were building up your program, and you got to, before you started shifting over to industrial, you had a good sized company going. What was your parents and perhaps not your mother, because you didn't touch on her, but your father, who was a lawyer, spent 8 years becoming a doctor. So he went that professional route of being a professional and doing the work for that. And I'm assuming that he enjoyed it, making the switch from a lawyer to a doctor. What did he say about your decision to go from university to being this entrepreneur and developing this massive portfolio?
Yeah. So, I think, again, another thing that has been a huge part of my life, and I probably appreciate it now that I have kids more than ever, but my dad was just my biggest supporter. He always believed in what I was doing. He might not have, he wasn't a business guy, so I don't think he could give me business advice, but he always supported what I was doing. I think he knew who I was in college. And so we never really had to have a conversation of whether I would be an entrepreneur or not. I think, to be fair, he probably thought, just like a lot of folks, which is the traditional path, maybe getting a job out of college isn't a bad thing. And it certainly isn't a bad thing. But I think he knew who I was. I had done the work throughout college. And so when the decision was made that this is what I was going to do, I don't think it was anything more than he was going to be supportive. But he's also, part of being supportive is he wasn't a parent that, he was always comfortable with me learning to make my own mistakes. He wasn't always going to he knew I would learn from him. And so he wasn't always trying to keep me from making a mistake. I think that's one thing that parents can do often, is they don't let their kids fail enough. We don't like to see our kids fail. It sucks. But the truth is, you learn a lot of those lessons. And so I think he believed that I would be successful. Unfortunately, we don't have to get into it. He passed away 3 years after college. But I can say, I think he thought I'd be successful, but I think he also knows that if it wasn't meant to be, I'd learn a lot of lessons from it and that I'd get better from it. And that's kind of how I've been my whole life. I don't dwell too much on any of my failures. I've constantly used them as tools to get better. And so, I think the lesson there is, as a parent, letting your kids fail, but more importantly, how lucky I was to have parents that were very supportive of the decisions that I wanted to make and let me be an adult and make those own decisions, hoping for the best, but knowing that if they didn't work out, I'd learn from them.
Yeah, well said. It's one of those sayings. It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to raise an entrepreneur as well. There's very few people that can just become an entrepreneur without having a lot of that support. So I can sense what a profound impact your dad had on you, and that might be a transition into discovering how you define Class B industrial. And if your dad was still around today, and he was knew that you were doing the developments and the residential side, how would you describe it? You're going to say to him, "I'm doing Class B industrial now, Dad." His first question is, "Well, what even is that?" How would you define it?
So we specifically focus on buildings that are built in major cities that have population growth, and I call them inside the loop. And so Class B is really a denomination of when these were built, the vintage in which they were built. So a lot of the buildings that we buy were built between, call it the 70s to maybe the late 90s. And so by way of when they were built, maybe at the time they would have been on the outskirts of some of these cities. But by the time we were buying them, they were very much part of mature infrastructure. So there was lots of rooftops around them, highway systems, schools. I mean, these are not buildings that are out on the outskirts of town where there's tons of land. These are entrapped buildings that are in great locations. But the Class B vintage is when they're built. Industrial back in the day was much different than the industrial we think today. There weren't these mega companies that had these 1 million to 2 million, 3 million square foot facilities with robotics, and they're built in a certain way to kind of function your business. These were kind of smaller properties that had smaller bays. Rooftops were not as high, but they served a great need in society. These were the businesses that served the local communities. They served the growth of these cities. So the contractors and the service providers that participate in the growth, all the way to the landscaping company that might be servicing the 3 miles of, houses or businesses around them. And so really it's warehousing, it's distribution. There is some manufacturing in Class B, but they are older buildings that you really can't rebuild. And we can get into that in a second, that are in mature areas that really you can make an argument, and I can in Texas, that not only is it not growing, they're depleting by 2 to 3% a year. These are buildings that can often be redeveloped into showroom or retail or entertainment uses, or they're torn down altogether. And you could see totally higher and better uses, multifamily, hotels, office buildings built on top of these. Why? Because they're typically in great locations. They are on large pieces of land that are flat, that have good dimensions to them. They're in large parks. So often, if you're trying to do a higher and better use or a rezone, you're not having to deal with, your neighbors tend to be other businesses. So it's a different type of negotiation on what you're going to do. And cities really encourage, for better or worse, removing these buildings so that they can have higher and better use buildings, which are good for tax base and probably seen as better for the city as a whole. I could make an argument why Class B needs to be there, and we can get into that. But that's how I would describe kind of a general thesis of what a Class B industrial is and where they're located. And like I said, the tenants in these buildings, and we have buildings with tenants as small as 1,200 square feet. We have 100,000 square foot tenants. The majority of our tenants are much smaller, but there's plenty of them. There's more tenants that are starting to enter the asset class because of e-commerce. So you have this whole new generation of tenants coming in. They're already close to rooftops. The infrastructure is already embedded. And so you have this really robust tenant demand growing and virtually no new supply coming on board really in any major city. And anybody listening to this, no matter where you're at, if you go to whatever city you're in or cities that you like to go to, and you think of those areas that are reemerging and what we call districts with live, work, play, a lot of those tend to be in old industrial parks. If you're in Dallas and you look at the design district or uptown, some of the tens of billions of dollars of new development, those were all industrial parks in the 80s and 90s. And now they are some of the most vibrant mixed use communities. If you go to Miami, to the Wynwood district, if you go to Fort Worth, to the West 7th district, in Nashville, I could go on and on, but a lot of these emerging districts are all old industrial parks that are being redeveloped.
As you were going through that, I thought of a question that I was going to save until the end, but I think it's relevant to ask here is there still runway growth in the industrial sector, in that Class B sector? We just went through this crazy amount of growth over, call it the last 3 years to be sure, but even the last decade. Is there still a runway for your investment thesis for Class B?
Oh yeah, as we sit today, which is April 5th, I would tell you it's a tale of two worlds right now in the real estate. The capital markets are kind of off right now. There's not a lot of transacting going on. But if I showed you our leasing reports, we're virtually fully leased. We continue to set record rate after record rate on new leases. The amount of tours that we're getting in any vacancy that we do have is at all-time highs. And again, a lot of that's driven by there's not a lot of supply out there. These are growing cities, so population's continuing to grow. So you have businesses that need space, but you're also seeing businesses that have been successful continue to expand within the space. And so as we sit today, I can't say there's any runway that I can foresee of new supply coming, but there is a ton of runway to invest in this. I think it's now becoming more institutionalized. Right now, Class B has a lot of fragmented ownership. So a lot of mom and pops, maybe a lot of owner operators that have owned this stuff, but they tend to be smaller deal sizes. And so a lot of the big institutions haven't been able to get in buying one building at a time. Now I can say, not to jump ahead, we have come across a strategy that has worked out really well, where a company of our size can go buy 7 or 8 of these buildings in a market, add value to them, get them stabilized, and then the Blackstones of the world, the KKRs of the world, the big companies are interested in buying them all if they can buy them at a portfolio level. And there's a lot of benefits you get there. You get cap rate compression, more operational efficiency, things of that nature. So I think the runway for this market is going to continue to grow. If you talk to some of the giants in capital markets right now, what does money want? They want industrial. They want multi-tenant. And again, I'm happy to go through all these. They want things with low WALT, which is weighted average lease term. These tend to be shorter leases so that you can get through rent rolls quicker. Traditionally, they've been looked at by the institutions as harder to manage because there's lots of tenants. Specifically to Fort, we think we've built an incredible property management team that do a lot of things the same as others, but a lot of things different. And so I think the institutional world is starting to really come around to it. So a lot of room there, a lot of room with tenant demand. And like I've said a few times, I would say no room for new development. Now, could you go out to the outskirts of a town and maybe put up a couple buildings? Yes, you could. But the dent that puts in the overall supply is relatively none. And for every new building that's being built on the outskirts of town, which I would argue are not as valuable as the buildings that are already built inside the loop with a lot of mature infrastructure, there's buildings being torn down. So I don't think you're adding any net square footage. And the last thing I would say, which is true for most businesses, a lot of the tenants, their customer base is within 1 mile to 3 miles of the building. So just because a new building's built out on the outskirts of town, they can't just move there. They have to stay with their current customer base. And again, I'm kind of just going through stuff, but a lot of our tenants, virtually all of them, they're not going to go pay more to be in a brand new shiny building. Industrial is a function of their business. Like we talked about earlier, they use the building to perform business. They can't perform their business without the building. Whereas an office, you can send everybody home and still conduct business. You can't tell everybody in the warehouse, hey, everybody go pick a few things off the shelves, take them to your garage, and we'll ship them from there. You have to have it open. And so, and again, maybe some buildings are nicer than others, but at the end of the day, it's how's my business performing, not how nice are the offices. The CEO needs a, golden toilet. These are, we can get into the predictability of CapEx, and these tenants are very kind of humble. They need a space that functions well, and that's about it. Building brand new buildings that are really cool, while they might be nice, they don't make the business run any better. If that makes sense.
I love it. I love how you explain that because I agree with everything that you said on there. And that was where I wanted to lead the conversation, was into that CapEx predictability. Because with much like a house, if you're buying a brand new house, you're going to have a lot less that you have to expect to spend maintaining that house, at least in the foreseeable future, versus buying a 40-year-old house. And the same goes with industrial. If you're buying an old property, there might start to be parking lot concerns, there might be roof concerns, you might start having HVAC or electrical issues. How do you prepare for that? And I guess you could even weave this in to your process of looking at a property. So maybe I'll present it because I think that'll make more sense for me anyways. So you get presented a property, broker, property owner sends you some information on a property, and perhaps it's just enough to wet your whistle. It's not a full package. Maybe it's just the size, the address, maybe a basic rent roll. How do you look at that property objectively to both say we can make financial sense of this, but also how do you prepare to forecast what your CapEx could be going down the road?
Yeah, so these buildings are fairly simple. I mean, they're boxes basically, and the things that matter the most are one, when we get sent a building, we might ask the current seller, what CapEx have you done? What property improvements have you made? I mean, whether we get that or not, that helps. But when we do an inspection on them, you really want to know what's the condition of the roof, which is very easy to understand. You can hire a roofer and they can give you a report, and you know where you stand. Do you need to put a new roof on? Is there patches that need to be made? Do you need to do an overlay? Like you said, the parking lot, you can go do a quick inspection on, is the parking lot, is it cracked? Is it nice so that trucks and things can get in and out of? You are mainly doing like minimal landscape. Maybe you're painting the buildings, maybe you're fixing HVAC units. But all of those things are super easy to predict. You just have to do good due diligence and understand where you sit. And then either no, this is what we have, and these are the things we're going to need to fix right out of the gate, or these are things that might come up over the next 5 years, and you just underwrite reserves to be able to pay for those things when and if they come up. As far as the interior of the suites on TIs, again, right now in this market, we're virtually giving, on a lot of leases, we're giving nothing. We're just getting the shell ready. And then sometimes we're giving maybe $1 or $2 of TI, because the tenants, their office space, they need carpet, they need lighting that works, maybe a fresh coat of paint, but they don't need these really detailed build outs. The warehouse needs to make sure, that it's functional. But if you think about retail or office or some of these other properties, the TI requirements are becoming huge. You're having to really do these robust build outs in the lobbies of office buildings. Tenants are now requiring what used to be $30 of TI. Some buildings, same building, now it's $100 or $200 of TI, and that moved really quick. And so the tenant demands, it's a tenant by tenant basis. There's no consistency. A Facebook is going to require a lot more than a local finance firm. And so it's a lot less predictable. Then you have all these new I'm using office, these Class A office towers being built. Well, if they have these incredible amenity sets for their tenants, then older buildings need to refresh their amenity sets to be able to be competitive. There really are no amenity sets in Class B per se. I mean, there's really not. These are, again, like maybe the craziest amenity I've seen outside of the norm is like somebody put a basketball hoop, at the end of one. But there's not these robust lobbies with all this art and fountains and all this crazy stuff. So it's just a very predictable understanding of the quality of the building. And then the tenant needs are virtually the same market by market. It's not like in Miami, tenants are requiring much better finish outs than in Texas, because again, they're all just using it for a function of their business. And that's in Class B. As you even get into Class A, that changes a little bit. If you're going to go lease a big 1 million square foot warehouse, there could be lots of things you're doing to the warehouse, robotics, crane systems, different build outs that could get expensive for the tenant's needs. You just don't see that in Class B.
It really is a different market from that Class A or other asset classes, but I agree with you completely. The needs that a landscaping company would have in Dallas is the exact same as the needs a landscaping company is going to have in their warehouse in Miami or Nashville or Toronto or Chicago. It is ubiquitous at how similar those needs are going to be. So it's not like you need to be thinking, well, this is specific for my market and this property needs to be different. They're all very, very similar. They're boxes, like you said.
That's correct.
But there are also some things that are different from the newer product. And I'm with you. Every property that I own myself is a Class B industrial. I love it for the exact same reasons you do. But I'm also aware that there's limitations with some of these properties. So the ceiling heights, as you mentioned earlier, that vintage 70s, vintage 80s built industrial tend to have sub 22-foot ceilings, sometimes even lower than that. And then the marshalling areas or the loading areas are also a lot more narrow. So you can't necessarily get a 53-footer backing into there like you could with a brand new built distribution center. Are there any how do you treat that in your mind? Is that just something that you accept with it? Because that's how I look at it. It's just that is an element of the building that we have to work around. But how do you look at that from a competitive landscape that this Class B industrial does have limitations compared to modern industrial?
Yeah, I think, and even within Class B, I talked about our tenant size, but you could have Class B buildings where you have single tenant buildings with 250,000 square feet. Those are probably going to be more sensitive to clear heights and what the building offers. We've chosen to focus again on smaller tenants, and this isn't the case for every single tenant, but we have some buildings where the clear heights are as low as 12 to 14 feet. And what you find with a lot of these tenants is they're really not racking things to the ceiling. They're not trying to get as much in, so they're a lot less sensitive. I think the larger your business gets and the larger your warehouse gets, the more sophisticated it gets and the more those things matter. And so for us, again, it's really looking at the rent roll. What are the current tenants doing? Who are the tenants in the market? What are their requirements? And virtually in everything we're buying, yeah, we might lose out on a tenant every now and again because of clear heights, but for the majority of tenants, I call it 90+% of tenants, they're much less sensitive to clear heights, to loading lanes and the space that you mentioned behind the buildings. It's just a lot different type of business. And again, as they grow and they have more 18-wheelers coming in and out on a daily basis, they tend to move, they're larger tenants, they tend to be larger tenants, and they're in buildings that are maybe more sensitive. But for the smaller tenants, I mean, when you think about our 1,200 square foot tenants, it's basically a contractor garage. It's one office and then some warehouse space to keep their supplies, maybe their equipment, maybe a few supplies, but it's a lot less different. It's a lot more different than these big warehousing companies or 3PLs or manufacturing companies that are trying to use every inch of the warehouse and maximize capacity. And I would say to that, for even the ones that are, what's starting to happen with forklifts and robotics, even for small businesses, they're able to get a lot more efficiency out of the warehouse than they were before. And that's another reason why we're really bullish on industrial in general, is the amount of investment going into helping businesses maximize every square foot or cubic foot of their warehouse is becoming more robust. And so these businesses are able to do a lot more business out of a certain footprint, which means, one, that's efficient, but two, they can pay more in rent. They're doing twice the amount of revenue through 10,000 square feet than they used to be able to. So those are all tailwinds headed in our direction. As an owner of a building, we don't have to pay for that stuff. That the tenant usually pays for that stuff, but we benefit from their increased efficiency in businesses.
Yeah, well said. And if I could just even add on to that as a kind of a thought that I've said to people as well, is that there's always a trade-off whenever you're leasing real estate, and especially industrial real estate. The trade-off is probably going to be cost for some functionality. Because if you wanted to have one of your smaller tenants, if you wanted to have a 1,200 square foot space with 30-foot high ceilings and loading area, somebody will build it for you, but you might be paying a factor of three times as much for your rent versus can you make do with that space that's in there. And like you mentioned, that older inventory is fixed. It's just very difficult to replace it. And even if you can replace it, just with inflation and upgraded building codes, increased cost of land versus what they would have built at many years ago, it's so expensive to actually build new product that in my market anyways, if with anything new that we see come on is actually double the price of what you'd get that 80s vintage for. So for a company that just wants a box, just a place to work out of, are they going to pay double the rent to have all these additional features? I agree with you. In my experience, they aren't. There's a very, very select few. So you have this growing demand. And even in if we do go into a bit of a market downturn here, I've noticed over my career that companies don't go out of business. They just tend to trim their costs. So even if we do go into a bit of a recessionary period here, those companies tend to just downsize. So if they can downsize into a fixed inventory set, you have this increasing demand, like you suggested, and decreasing supply. It really is a good combination. And I think that's why you have such low vacancy rate and are able to push your rents up is for all those reasons, which just makes it a fascinating business case.
Yeah, I mean, what you said on construction costs is spot on. And if you look at, let's just say construction costs were in check, you still have to be able to find these 10 to 20 acre parcels of land that are priced for industrial, that are vacant, that have cities that want to see industrial product go there rather than a higher, better use. So the land isn't even there. I mean, and again, it is on the outskirts of town. And you could make an argument, maybe there's a site or two in town, but not at the rate that you would need to build to make a dent. And one thing you were talking about tenants and why we love it, not only the growing tenant demand, but if you live in a Class B apartment and you get a raise or you make better money, you might choose to leave and get a house, or maybe you move to a Class A apartment. If you're in an office building and you're in a Class B office building and your business starts doing a lot better, you might choose to move to a Class A office building to, reward the success of the business. When you're in Class B industrial and you start doing financially better, you don't leave and go to Class A industrial. You actually just grow within the space. So maybe you had 10,000 feet. Now you take 20,000 feet. There is no incentive to leave the asset class altogether. So you have a stickier tenant base that when they succeed, they actually grow into your portfolio rather than leave it altogether.
Great point. It even just triggered one more benefit. And you mentioned that there's not amenities in these buildings in themselves, other than maybe a basketball hoop, but these older industrial parks, there's a lot of amenities in the area, and that can be proximity to their staff. There can be proximities to their suppliers or their customers, can just be the restaurants and the shopping in the area. A lot of these old industrial areas, just by nature of where they're located, have all these amenities around it. Whereas if you go out of town, and there's a major industrial park outside of my city where there's a lot of available land and people build, but there's no amenities, there's no restaurants around it. The staff, and this is one thing I've always noticed as well, is that very few companies, at the beginning anyways, take into consideration public transport for their employees. And if you're paying minimum wage or a low wage, chances are you're going to have staff that need public transit. So you can't be located 15 minutes outside of the city and expect all of your staff to get there, especially if they don't drive. So that older industrial areas, just there's so much to be bullish about on that. And I just get excited even talking to you about this, because it makes me just remember some of the points that I've had over the years as well, about there's so many reasons to be optimistic about it. I want to actually get your thoughts on how you would look at a property right now. So, and we touched on it a little bit, but what is your ideal property that you're searching for? When I know you're in several different markets, mostly in Texas. You're in Houston's, I think, your number one market right now, if I remember reading that correctly. You're also in Dallas. You're based in Fort Worth, so you're in Dallas, Austin as well. How do you look at markets first? Because I think that's an important question. Is population growth, you mentioned that. I'm a huge advocate of that as well. Population growth is the driver for all economic activity. How do you determine what those are? Because there are going to be cities that have economic or population growth right now that I personally wouldn't be interested in. So going beyond population growth, how do you identify which markets first? And then perhaps we could get into what you like in properties right now.
Yeah, so population growth is the large one. We don't have to go into that. Climate. So, we're now expanding throughout the Sunbelt. So, they have a good climate. You can look at a lot of these cities, like what are their future growth plans? What are their infrastructure plans? So cities that are, prepared to take on this population growth, the friendliness of governments. I think we're getting more political as a world, and there's some cities that They just have a way of looking at things that are not what I'd call pro-business. So are they pro-business? Those are some of the major ones. And then you can look, within the city and look at different submarkets and demographics of, where things are headed. Where is growth headed even within a city? It's one thing to say like people are moving to Dallas, but where in Dallas? Are these close to major institutions like hospital systems, universities, entertainment? So if you go to Arlington, like in Arlington, Texas, it's right by DFW Airport. It's connected to Dallas and Fort Worth. It's got the Dallas Cowboys, the Rangers, all the major sports teams. There's just a lot of commerce happening there. So it's one thing just to pick a city and say a lot of people are moving there. It's another thing to say, okay, where within that pocket? Also, like, what are major industries in that city? Are there population growth is one thing. You can have a lot of bodies moving, but are corporations moving there? Are businesses moving there? So in Dallas, Fort Worth, you've seen hundreds of corporate relocations. JP Morgan, Toyota, Goldman Sachs, all these things. So with those people come high dollars that they're spending. So that's more money to maintain their house. They're doing a lot more with their money. So we look at that. We look at the transit systems in those cities. Is it easy to get around? Has the city thought through a great transit plan? Or are these cities, like if you look at areas of Georgia, and we're in Memphis and some areas where there's even more infrastructure coming. A lot of cities will tell you, they'll lay out their 10, 20-year plan of how they plan to grow, and you can make decisions on, where in the city would be good. Maybe it's an area that at first meets the eye, thinks, oh, there's better parts of the city. But when you really zoom out and look at maybe the next 10 years and you look at activity today, government planning, private planning, you could go, oh, the northwest part of the city is about to grow. Like if you're talking about Austin, San Antonio has been a huge beneficiary of the growth of Austin. So you can look at corridors that are connecting San Antonio to Austin and start buying in those, thinking, San Antonio is going to grow, but if Austin keeps growing, it's going to have a dramatic impact on that area of San Antonio. So there's a lot of things you can do once you've picked a city to kind of start cutting it up into quadrants and realizing, where might be better places than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So assuming someone identified an area based on those factors, how do you look at a specific property? Is there a checklist that you want to see? Are there things that you avoid, or is it driven largely by, if it's Class B industrial and it's got a good rent roll, we're interested?
Yeah. So for us, if we've seen an area and it's a deal that, we think makes sense financially, things that are interesting to us. So we're value add buyers. So we're not the buyer that's buying something that's already been stabilized. We're looking to create that value. So what would be some things that we'd look at? One would just be like an absentee owner, somebody that just hasn't managed it appropriately. And if you're in the business long enough, you can spot that almost immediately. We like having vacancy in buildings because that's additional income once it gets leased. We like looking at where rents are in the portfolio versus where market is. A lot of these leases, especially as the tenants get smaller, can be as short as 2 to 3 years, up to 5 years. So how far under market are we, and how quickly will we be able to get those leases to market? We look at if they're gross leases that we can convert to triple net leases, which is a value add. Again, we look at the condition of the building. Would putting CapEx in add value to this building? Putting a new roof. A new roof is very valuable because there might be a lot of tenants that didn't want to lease there for a long time because it had roofing issues or leaking issues. Not to say that tenants don't want something nice, but sometimes painting the building, new signage, a little bit of landscaping, that goes a long way. Again, these are people's place of work and where they do business. They want something that they can be proud of. We'll look at the competitive set. We'll look at all the other buildings in the market and say, how are they being managed? Who are the tenants in those buildings? Where are rents at? How much vacancy is in this submarket? So if you have a submarket with a lot of vacancy in it, and you buy a property with a lot of vacancy, is one, you have to understand, why is there a lot of vacancy in this market? If in other parts of the city there is no vacancy, maybe there's a reason why, and you have to dig into that. we'll look at the rent roll of who are the businesses currently in there. Are there these businesses that we want? Are there problem child businesses that are kind of, either they're always paying late, or maybe they're using the space? And a lot of these tenants sometimes will put stuff outside of their space because there tends to be lots of room, and they're making the property messy, or they're not using it by their lease guidelines. We'll kind of look at all of those things, and you can weight them a little bit, but a good deal for us has vacancy, has near-term roll, which is WALT, weighted average lease term. So if WALT on a building is a year, that basically means that across the building, the average lease is going to roll within a year, which for us means if rents are $5 or what they're signed at and the market's $8, we know within a year we'll be able to lift that from 5 to 8. We'll talk to brokers in the area. We'll talk to property managers in the area and get their feedback. Brokers will tell you a lot about the market. And I would specifically talk to leasing brokers. So call leasing brokers on other buildings. Why is your space not leasing? Or why is it leasing? If it's not leasing, what would need to happen to make it lease? Again, a lot of these absentee owners, their buildings aren't leasing because the market isn't there. They're not leasing because the owner isn't fixing up the spaces. A lot of the tenants that are in our business, they're not out looking a year ahead to move. They're looking within 60 days of needing to move. And so if you have a space that fits them, but it needs to be totally, cleaned up and ready to go, and that's going to take 90 to 120 days, they have to pass you up. And so we see that so often where prior owners, either they didn't have the money, they were lazy, one of those, where they have all this vacancy that you tour it and it's like it would fit, but it needs a total rehab. It needs to be brought up to speed. And so what we'll go in often when we buy those types of buildings, we'll go in and we'll immediately start getting every suite ready to lease so that if somebody were to see it, they could sign a lease the next day and move in. And it sounds simple. And the answer is it is. I can't tell you how many leases we've gotten purely because we had a space ready to go and the prior owner wasn't.
Especially those smaller tenants, they tend to leave things to the last minute and they scramble to find a space. And if the space isn't ready for them, they have no choice but to either wait, which often they can't, or take what's available. So yeah, you're right that those small bays tend to get neglected by landlords quite often. Even landlords that have owned the building for a long time that might be in the market, they tend not to invest a lot of money in them because they've just been cash cows for them for so long that they tend not to put any money in it. So if you do the minimum of, like you said, just paint, a little paint on the exterior, a little bit of work to freshen it up, and you have it ready to go, that can often be the difference on that. And I love the point you made about calling leasing brokers in the area, because leasing brokers will love to talk about what's happened in the market, and especially if you're a potential client of theirs down the road, they'll be very interested in giving you market information. So I'd encourage people to actually take up on that tip.
And real quick on that, some of our best deals have come from calling a leasing broker on another building and talking to them. And they're like, yeah, our landlord, they won't put money into the building. They won't do all these things. This is why it continues. And we might just ask them, well, would that landlord consider selling? And so we've had deals just calling on other buildings and seeing that there's an issue there. Leasing brokers will tell you the truth. One, like you said, they want to gain your business, but two, we've done a lot of deals that way. One thing I was going to bring up, not to pivot a little bit, but it's something that's kind of a new thing that I've thought about. I've thought about this asset class now since 2016. But if you look at every asset class, because you could make an argument, well, if you could go vertical with these buildings, maybe there are a lot of sites that you could start building Class B industrial. Class B industrial lives on one single story. It can never live in two single stories. No. Even with Class A industrial, you're starting to see the Amazons of the world build 5 or 6 stories high. But self-storage, you can now go vertical with. Residential, they're building towers. Office, you can build to the moon if you want. Retail, not as much, but you can still have double level retail. It's the only asset class really that I can think of where you can't go vertical with it. And so as long as that remains the place, then you can't go, well, we could just go find a 3-acre piece of land and just build a 20-story Class B industrial building. Now it works, and now we can start building supply. You just can't do that. All these tenants require first floor access for their business. And so that's another kind of moat that we have that a lot of other asset classes are starting to experience, that like in housing, you can build more housing, one, because we need it, but you can pay more for the land because you can now go 7, 8, 10, 20 stories high. And so just another thing I haven't talked about on other podcasts, but I've started thinking about more is you can't go vertical with it, which is another moat.
Yeah, it was such a great point. As you're saying that, another one occurred to me as well, is that another moat is, and perhaps it's not in more pro-business states like Texas and Florida, but in California, there's warehouse moratoriums. I think they had 11 different submarkets that had a prohibition on warehouse development. I think some of them are starting to expire, but there's already chatter that they want to extend those. So you have some of these states where they're not even opening up new land for supply. So then you're even further constrained. Not only can you not go vertical, but you can't even get land to add new inventory for that Class B. So yeah, it's very fascinating how many moats there are on that. And I'm cognizant of our time here, and I do appreciate you going a couple minutes over on this.
Yeah, we're good.
I had one question that perhaps can summarize the state of the market right now. How are you finding deals, and how are you getting deals done in this current interest rate environment?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate. We've built, our team's now 48 people. We have a portfolio that if we do no deals or do 100 deals, our overhead's covered. So we're in a position where we don't have to make a deal happen to keep the lights on. So that's a good spot to be in. We don't believe in pencils down. That's a phrase you sometimes hear when the market goes down. We actually take the opposite. We think we're going to find the market. So there's a lot of deals starting to pick up right now, or at least a lot of folks that are maybe over the euphoria of I'm not going to sell for what I could have in 2021 or 2022. We have a lot of deal flow. There's still a lot of price dislocation, but we're making offers as if we were back in 2021, 2022. Our hit rate is much lower now. But we think the best way to get deals done right now is to stay in the market. And so the brokers in the markets that we're in know to send us things. In fact, and we're making offers all the time. We're on the phone with lenders all the time, trying to figure out if we were to get something, what would be our cost of debt. It's starting to stabilize, and I think the market's kind of priced in that a ton more price hikes are not really probably feasible. Who knows what'll happen? But I think we've kind of started to solve the inflation problem. So we have a good idea of where debt is. Equity is still it's kind of a hit or miss. There's a lot of groups that are the animal spirits are going and they're ready to start putting money to work. And then there's some people saying, we're going to continue to stay on the sidelines. Again, not talking our own book. I think there's a lot more money available for shallow bay Class B industrial right now than other asset classes. We know that to be true because I'm on the phone all the time with these people. So we just put our first deal under contract in 6 months a week ago. We're actually sending it out to our investors either tonight or tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see how that raise goes. We have our large investor already pegged. And so we'll be trying to raise $6 or $7 million, syndicating through our high net worth group, and we'll see how that plays out. But the markets, I feel like we're closer to finding a market than not. And the other thing I'd say is we do a lot of our deals off market. So won't get into it on this podcast, but the way we've been able to create a machine that can generate off market opportunities is interesting. But one of the things we found right now is talking to sellers in an off market situation. Either A, they don't need to sell, or B, maybe they still haven't come back to reality. And, it's a tougher conversation. The deals actually right now that are getting brought out by brokers, maybe they're being publicly marketed, or maybe it's just a broker that calls us and, there's going to be a broker involved. We're actually having more traction with those folks because if it's a good broker, they've already set expectations with the seller. A good broker is not going to take a deal to market that they can't get done. I'm not saying that's every broker. I'm talking about a good broker. And so the hit rate right now with deals that have brokers on them are actually probably higher for us than they were kind of pre this new cycle that we're going into. And so, I just think that's interesting.
Very interesting. And I could very easily talk to you about this for hours. So if you're up for it, perhaps we could do a part 2 in the fall, because I'd love to have you come on the live show as well, because I have a ton of questions and I'm sure other people do as well. But in respect of your time, perhaps that's a good spot to wrap up for right now. I'll put links to your Twitter, which you've got 80,000 followers right now, by the way. Congratulations for that. Great.
Thank you.
At LinkedIn and your podcast, the Fort podcast. Any other way people can get in touch with you, or you want to direct people to?
Yeah, they can go to our company's website, www.fortcapitallp.com. I also have a podcast, The Fort, and have done 280 episodes and have similar conversations, or you can find me on Twitter.
Awesome.
At Fort Worth Chris.
I'll put links to all those in the description, and I just really do want to thank you for taking the time to do this. It was a long time coming. We were trying to do it in person in Dallas and weren't able to do that. But I'm really glad that you were able to take some time, and even an extra 12 minutes on that too. So I apologize for going a little bit over what I said, but I really do appreciate your insights and wisdom on this.
It's okay. It was a pleasure to do it. I'm a fan of you and a fan of the show, and would love to do another one in October. I think, if things play out, I think the second half of the year will be busier than the first half of the year, and it might make for an interesting time to talk again. So thank you for the opportunity to come on and share. And this was great.
Well, it's pleasure is all mine. I will definitely reach out and we'll schedule something for the fall here as well. And really do thank you for your time, and I'll shoot you